Imagine you are standing at the foot of a great stone wall. The air is cool and smells of damp earth and wood smoke. Above you, the moon silhouettes the jagged battlements of a fortress that has stood for centuries. For many, this place was not a monument or a battlefield. It was a home. You step through the heavy iron gates and hear the sound of your boots clicking against the uneven cobblestones. Inside these high walls, a whole world exists. It is a place of flickering torchlight, narrow corridors, and the constant hum of life. You are not a visitor here. You are one of the hundreds who will never leave these stone boundaries. From the lowest servant to the highest lord, your entire existence is contained within this circle of granite. Let the modern world fade away as you settle into the rhythm of the castle. You are standing at the edge of a wide, grassy clearing as the first light of dawn begins to crest over the horizon. The air is cool and damp, carrying the scent of dew and the faint, mineral smell of freshly cut stone. Before you, a massive silhouette rises against the pale sky. It is not yet a finished fortress, but the skeleton of something grand, something that will soon become a world unto itself. This is the place where you will spend the rest of your days. To those outside these rising walls, a castle is a symbol of power or a distant monument. To you, it is the beginning and the end of the horizon. You walk toward the foundation, your boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The ground here has been disturbed by years of labor. You see the deep trenches where the footings have been laid, reaching down into the bedrock to ensure that these walls will never shift, regardless of the weight they are destined to carry. You run your hand over a block of limestone that has just been hauled from the local quarry. It is rough, cold, and heavy. It feels ancient already, as if it has always been waiting to be pulled from the earth and stacked into this particular shape. The rhythm of the castle begins with the sound of the masons. Even at this early hour, you can hear the steady rhythmic clinking of iron chisels against the rock. It is a slow, methodical music. There is no rush here. A castle is not built in a season. It is built over decades, sometimes spanning the entire lives of the people who first broke the ground. You watch a mason as he carefully marks a line on a fresh block. He works with a patience that is difficult for the modern mind to grasp. He knows that he might never see the roof completed on the tower he is currently raising. He is building for your children and for their children. As you move closer to the center of the site, you notice the smell of the lime mortar. It is a sharp, acrid scent that lingers in the back of your throat. Great pits of slaked lime are being stirred by laborers, creating the thick, white paste that will act as the glue for this mountain of stone. You watch them work the mixture, their movements slow and steady, mirroring the pace of the construction itself. This mortar is the lifeblood of the structure, filling the gaps and creating a solid, impenetrable mass. You step through what will one day be the great gatehouse. For now, it is an opening of jagged edges and wooden scaffolding, but you can already feel the shift in atmosphere as you move inside the perimeter. The world outside feels vast and unpredictable, but here, within the footprint of the walls, there is a sense of emerging order. You are entering a controlled environment. The wind, which was biting just a few moments ago, is dampened by the rising masonry. The sounds of the forest and the distant river are muffled, replaced by the internal echoes of the construction. You walk across the inner ward, where the ground is a patchwork of muddy paths and stacks of timber. You can see the outlines of the buildings that will soon serve as the heart of the community. Here will be the smithy, where the heat of the forge will eventually combat the winter chill. There will be the granary, designed to hold the harvests of the surrounding lands. And in the center, the great hall, a space of flickering torchlight and the low murmur of voices during the evening meal. For a person who lives their entire life inside these walls, the concept of distance is redefined. You do not think of miles or leagues. You think of the number of steps from the kitchen to the buttery, or the height of the spiral staircase leading to the solar. Your geography is vertical. You know the exact texture of the stone in the third arch of the cellar. You know which flags in the courtyard hold puddles after a rain and which ones catch the afternoon sun. Imagine being born as these walls are still reaching for the clouds. Your first memories are the sounds of the cranes creaking as they lift heavy loads of timber to the upper floors. You learn to walk on floors that are still being leveled, and your playground is a labyrinth of construction materials. As you grow, the castle grows with you. By the time you reach adulthood, the scaffolding is gone, replaced by the smooth, imposing face of the curtain wall. The stone that was once bright and raw has begun to weather, taking on a soft, gray patina that matches the sky on a misty morning. You find yourself standing in the center of the keep, the strongest and most protected part of the fortress. The walls here are 10 feet thick. When you stand in the middle of a room, you are surrounded by thousands of tons of rock. This creates a profound sense of stillness. The thick walls act as a thermal regulator, keeping the interior cool in the height of summer and retaining a glimmer of warmth from the hearths during the freezing nights of January. You feel a sense of permanence that is almost overwhelming. This building is not a temporary shelter. It is a mountain made by human hands. You look up toward the ceiling where the heavy oak beams are slotted into the masonry. These trees were felled in a forest miles away, dragged here by teams of oxen, and hoisted into place by systems of pulleys and pure physical strength. You can see the marks of the adze on the wood, the scars of the tools that shaped them. Every inch of this space has been touched, measured, and placed with intention. As the sun rises higher, the light begins to filter through the narrow, splayed windows. These windows are wider on the inside than the outside, designed to draw in as much light as possible while remaining defenseless against the elements. You watch a beam of sunlight crawl across the floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It is a slow, silent clock, marking the passage of the day. In the silence of the morning, you realize that your life is inextricably tied to the rhythm of this stone. You are not just a resident of the castle. You are a part of its ecosystem. The castle requires constant care, a never-ending cycle of maintenance. There are roof tiles to be replaced, stones to be repointed, and chimneys to be swept. The building is a living thing, breathing through its vents and settling into the earth. You spend your days tending to its needs, and in return, it provides you with a certainty that few others in this age possess. While the world outside may be subject to the whims of nature and the chaos of the road, inside the walls, there is a predictable structure. You walk toward the spiral staircase that leads to the battlements. The steps are narrow and uneven, worn smooth in the center by the feet of those who came before you. As you climb, the air grows cooler and the light dims, until you reach the top and emerge onto the wall walk. From here, you can look down at the entire world you inhabit. You see the roofs of the outbuildings, the smoke beginning to curl from the kitchen chimneys, and the guards pacing their rounds. Looking outward, the landscape stretches to the horizon, a tapestry of green and brown. But your eyes always return to the stone beneath your feet. To you, the outside world is a backdrop, a beautiful but distant painting. The reality is the weight of the ramparts, the smell of the cooking fires, and the security of the gate. You realize that for many who lived here, the castle was not a cage but a sanctuary. It was a place where every person had a role and every stone had a purpose. You lean against the crenellations, feeling the solid grit of the stone against your palms. The morning is fully awake now. The sounds of the castle are no longer the sounds of construction, but the sounds of life. You hear the clatter of buckets at the well, the barking of a dog in the courtyard, and the distant call of a servant. This is the foundation of a lifetime. This is the first stone in a story that will take decades to tell, written in the language of lime, oak, and iron. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the solidity of the fortress anchor you, feeling the peace of a world that is defined, protected, and enduring. You are home. The first thing you notice is the weight. Before your eyes even open, before the world of the castle begins to take shape around you, there is the heavy, comforting pressure of the blankets. They are made of thick, coarse wool, layered one on top of the other to trap the warmth your body has produced during the long night. This warmth is precious. Beyond the edges of your bed, the air is sharp and still, held captive by the thick stone walls that surround you. These walls are 10 feet deep in places, and they have a memory for the cold. Even in the height of summer, a certain chill lingers in the corners of the keep, a reminder of the thousands of tons of rock that shield you from the outside world. You lie still for a moment, listening to the silence. It is not a modern silence, which is often filled with the hum of electricity or the distant drone of traffic. This is a medieval silence, thick and textured. You can hear the slow, rhythmic breathing of others nearby. In a castle, privacy is a luxury that few truly possess. Even if you are a person of high status, sleeping in a solar or a screened-off chamber, there are always servants or attendants sleeping on pallets near the door or at the foot of your bed. The castle is a living, breathing organism, and you are never truly alone. A pale, gray light begins to filter through the narrow windows. These windows are not the expansive panes of glass you might know. They are deep, splayed slits in the masonry, designed to let in light while keeping out arrows and the worst of the wind. They do not have glass, at least not in most rooms. Instead, they are covered with shutters of solid oak or perhaps a lattice of wood stretched with translucent parchment or linen soaked in oil. As the sun begins its slow ascent over the distant hills, a sliver of dawn touches the floor. It reveals the rushes that cover the stones. These dried plants, gathered from the riverbanks, are soft underfoot and release a faint, herbal scent of meadowsweet and lavender as they are disturbed. Downstairs in the great hall, the first movements of the day are beginning. You can hear the muffled sound of a heavy iron poker striking the hearth. The fire is the heart of the castle, and it is never truly allowed to die. During the night, the coals were banked, covered with ash to keep them glowing. Now, a young servant is kneeling in the gray light, blowing softly on the embers, feeding them small twigs and then larger logs of oak or ash. You hear the crackle as the flames catch. Soon, the smell of wood smoke begins to drift upward through the winding stone staircases, a familiar and comforting scent that signals the start of the day. You finally decide to push back the heavy wool covers. The sudden contact with the cool air makes you shiver and you move quickly. There is a specific rhythm to waking here, a sequence of actions that has remained unchanged for generations. You reach for your basin. The water is cold, having sat in a ceramic jug overnight. As you splash it onto your face, the shock of the temperature clears the last lingering fog of sleep from your mind. You use a small piece of linen to pat your skin dry. There is no running water, no taps to turn. Every drop of water used in this room was carried up those narrow, spiraling stairs in heavy buckets, a task that began long before you woke. Now comes the process of dressing. This is not the simple task of modern times. You begin with a chemise or a shirt of fine linen. It is soft and white, the most intimate layer of your clothing. It feels cool against your skin. Over this you layer a tunic of wool. If the morning is particularly cold, you might add a second tunic or a sleeveless surcoat. The wool is heavy and dense, dyed in deep earthy tones of madder red or woad blue. There are no zippers or buttons to be found. Instead, you use leather laces and small metal pins to secure your garments. You sit on the edge of the bed to pull on your hosen, which are long stockings of wool that reach up to your thighs, fastened to your linen undergarments with points, which are small cords with metal tips. Finally, you slide your feet into soft leather shoes, thin-soled and flexible, which offer little protection from the cold stones but allow you to move quietly through the corridors. As you step out of your chamber, the scale of the castle truly reveals itself. You find yourself at the top of a spiral staircase, the steps worn into smooth hollows by the passage of countless feet over the decades. You place your hand on the central stone pillar, the newel, as you descend. The stone is cold and slightly damp to the touch. With every turn of the stair, the sounds of the castle grow louder. You hear the clank of buckets being filled at the well in the courtyard. You hear the rhythmic thud of a pestle hitting a mortar in the kitchen, where herbs and spices are being ground for the morning meal. You reach the great hall, the vast central space where much of castle life unfolds. It is a room of grand proportions, with a high timber-framed roof that disappears into the shadows above. The morning light streams in through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes that dance in the air. The long wooden tables where the household will soon gather have been scrubbed clean. The air here is a mixture of smells. There is the lingering scent of last night's roasted meat, the fresh smell of the new rushes on the floor, and the omnipresent tang of wood smoke from the large central hearth. You see the dogs first. Several large hounds are stretched out near the fire, their tails thumping softly against the floor as they see you approach. They are an integral part of the castle, serving as hunters, guardians, and companions. One of them rises, stretches its long limbs, and comes over to nudge your hand with a cold nose. You reach down to scratch its ears, feeling the coarse fur and the warmth of its body. In the courtyard, which you can see through the open doors of the hall, the castle is fully awake. The mist is still clinging to the ground, curling around the base of the towers like a white shroud. You see the blacksmith at his forge, the glow of his fire a bright orange spark in the gray morning. The rhythmic ring of his hammer against the anvil is like a heartbeat for the community. It is a steady, reassuring sound that tells you work is being done, that the tools of the life of the castle are being maintained. You watch as a group of servants carries large baskets of bread from the ovens. The bread is dark and dense, made from flour ground at the local mill. The smell of baking bread is one of the great joys of the morning, a scent that speaks of sustenance and security. Soon the rest of the household will begin to filter into the hall. The knights, the squires, the ladies, and the craftsmen will all take their places according to their rank. But for now, in these early moments, there is a sense of peace. The morning prayer bell begins to ring from the small chapel tucked away in one of the corner towers. Its tone is clear and high, cutting through the other sounds of the morning. This is the signal that the day has officially begun. You make your way toward the chapel, your soft shoes silent on the stone. The chapel is a place of quiet contemplation, its walls decorated with colorful frescoes and its air thick with the scent of beeswax candles. Here, the community gathers for a brief moment of reflection before the labor of the day takes over. As you stand in the chapel, listening to the low murmur of the chaplain's voice, you realize that this is the rhythm of your life. It is a cycle dictated by the sun and the seasons, by the strength of the stone walls and the warmth of the central fire. Everything you need is here within these walls. The world outside, with its forests and fields and distant villages, is a place you may visit, but the castle is your universe. It is a place of routine and repetition, of shared spaces and common goals. The sun continues to rise, clearing the top of the ramparts and flooding the courtyard with golden light. The shadows retreat into the corners and the castle, this great mountain of stone and spirit, prepares itself for another day of life. You feel a deep sense of belonging. The day has begun and you are exactly where you are meant to be. You step through the thick arched gateway of the inner ward and the world changes once again. Here the air feels different. It is cooler, held in place by the high, massive walls of the heart of the castle. The sounds of the outer bailey, the shouting of the stable hands, the braying of the mules, and the constant movement of the workshops, all seem to fall away behind you. They are replaced by a profound and rhythmic stillness. This is the core of the fortress, a place where the stone seems to breathe with a slow and ancient pulse. You are standing in the center of a space defined by its permanence. As you look around, your eyes adjust to the soft play of light and shadow. The sun, high in the sky now, casts long and sharp angles across the courtyard. One half of the ward is bathed in a bright, pale yellow light, while the other half remains in a deep, cool blue shadow. This contrast is the defining visual of your world. You learn to move with these shadows, seeking the warmth of the sun in the early morning and the cool of the stone in the heat of the afternoon. Reach out your hand and touch the wall nearest to you. The stone is rough and uneven under your fingertips. You can feel the marks of the chisel where a mason, perhaps centuries ago, shaped this block of limestone. There are tiny fossils embedded in the rock, remnants of a sea that existed long before the castle was even a dream. The mortar between the stones is gritty and dry, a mixture of lime and sand that has hardened into something as strong as the mountain itself. In the crevices where the mortar has slightly receded, tiny patches of moss and silver lichen have taken hold. They are soft and velvety, a small touch of life against the unyielding gray. The ground beneath your feet is a patchwork of history. In some areas there are smooth, flat flagstones, worn down by generations of footsteps until they shine slightly in the light. In other areas the ground is simply packed earth and gravel, which crunches softly as you walk. This sound, the steady crunch of your own pace, becomes a familiar companion. It is a grounding sound, reminding you of your connection to this specific piece of earth. As you walk toward the center of the ward, you notice the smells that define this inner sanctuary. There is the ever-present scent of wood smoke, a thin and bluish ribbon that drifts down from the chimneys of the great hall. It is a comforting smell, suggesting the warmth of a hearth and the preparation of a meal. Mixed with the smoke is the damp, earthy aroma of the stone itself. When the humidity rises or a light rain falls, the castle walls release a scent of wet minerals and ancient dust. It is a clean smell, one that speaks of endurance and shelter. To your left, near the entrance to the kitchen gardens, the air is thick with the fragrance of herbs. Even in this fortress of stone, there is a dedicated space for the green and the growing. You can smell the sharp, piney scent of rosemary and the sweet, earthy perfume of thyme. These herbs are more than just food, they are part of the sensory map of your home. You know exactly where you are simply by the way the air changes as you pass the garden gate. Lavender grows here too, its purple spikes swaying slightly in the breeze that manages to dip over the high battlements. The scent is calming, a gentle counterpoint to the stern reality of the fortifications. The acoustics of the inner ward are unique. Because of the high walls, every sound is amplified and then softened by an echo. You hear the distant clatter of a wooden bucket being set down on a stone floor, and the sound bounces gently from wall to wall before fading into the sky. You hear the muffled voices of servants moving through the corridors of the keep, their words indistinguishable but their tone familiar. There is a sense of privacy here, even though you are in an open courtyard. The walls do more than keep out enemies, they hold in the life of the castle, creating a world that feels complete and self-contained. Look up toward the keep, the great tower that dominates the inner ward. Its windows are narrow slits at the bottom, widening as they rise toward the higher floors where the lord and lady reside. The glass in these upper windows is thick and slightly green, rippling the light as it passes through. From where you stand, you can see the reflection of the clouds moving across the glass. It is a reminder of the world outside, of the vast sky that stretches beyond these walls, yet from here the sky feels like a ceiling, a blue canopy that belongs to the castle alone. You find yourself walking toward the chapel, a small and sturdy building tucked into a corner of the ward. The door is heavy oak, reinforced with iron straps that have been hammered into decorative swirls. As you push it open, the sound of the world outside is instantly cut off. The air inside is heavy with the smell of beeswax and old parchment. It is a still air, undisturbed by the wind. The light filters through small stained glass windows, casting pools of deep red, vibrant blue, and rich gold onto the stone floor. You watch the dust motes dancing in these beams of light, a slow and silent ballet that seems to suspend time itself. When you step back out into the ward, the transition is subtle. The sun has moved slightly, and the shadows have shifted their positions. You are struck by the rhythm of this movement. Every day the light performs this same slow crawl across the stones. You have come to know every crack and every stain on these walls. You know which stones hold the heat of the sun long after the evening has turned cold. You know which corners remain damp even in the height of summer. This intimate knowledge of your surroundings provides a deep sense of security. Nothing here changes quickly. The castle is a constant. In the afternoon, the inner ward becomes a place of quiet industry. You might see a woman sitting on a stone bench, her fingers moving with practiced ease as she spins wool into thread. The whirring of the spindle is a low, hypnotic sound. Nearby, a page might be polishing a piece of harness, the rhythmic scrap of the cloth against the leather adding to the tapestry of sound. There is no rush here. The stone walls seem to demand a slower pace of life. You find yourself breathing more deeply, your movements becoming more deliberate. As you continue your walk, you pass the entrance to the great hall. The heavy doors are propped open to let in the air, and you catch a glimpse of the vast interior. Even from the outside you can feel the shift in scale. The hall is a forest of timber beams and high rafters. The smell of rushes, spread across the floor to catch the debris of the day, wafts out to meet you. It is a scent of dried grass and meadowsweet, a fleeting reminder of the fields outside the walls. But even this smell is soon overtaken by the dominant scent of the ward, the smell of sun-warmed stone. You lean back against a buttress, feeling the solid strength of the masonry against your spine. It is a comforting weight. You think about the people who built this, the hands that moved these stones into place, and the generations who have stood exactly where you are standing now. Their lives were lived within this same sensory world. They heard the same echoes, smelled the same wood smoke, and watched the same shadows move across the courtyard. There is a profound sense of continuity in this. You are not just a person living in a castle, you are part of the castle itself, a temporary tenant in an eternal structure. The day continues its slow progression. The light begins to soften, turning from the bright white of midday to a warm, honeyed gold. The textures of the stone become more pronounced in this low light, every indentation and ridge casting its own tiny shadow. The world feels as though it is settling down, preparing for the quiet of the evening. You feel a deep sense of belonging. The inner ward is not just a place of defense, it is a sanctuary, a world made of stone and mortar that holds you safe within its embrace. Here, amidst the sensory details of the everyday, you find a peace that is as solid and enduring as the walls themselves. You are home and the castle is watching over you as it always has and as it always will. Imagine now that you are standing at the very mouth of this stone giant. You are at the gatehouse, the most formidable and heavily guarded part of the entire castle. This is the threshold, the thin line between the wild, unpredictable world outside and the ordered, sheltered world within. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long, purple shadows across the moat, the atmosphere here changes. The bustling activity of the day begins to settle into a rhythmic, watchful quiet. You are here to observe the men who never truly sleep, the guardians who ensure that while the rest of the castle rests, the pulse of the fortress remains steady. The man in charge of this vital pulse is the constable. You can see him now, a figure of quiet authority crossing the inner courtyard toward the gatehouse. He is not necessarily a man of high noble birth, but he is a man of absolute trust. When the lord of the castle is away at court or off on a campaign, the constable is the master of this stone world. He is the keeper of the keys, the commander of the garrison, and the ultimate arbiter of who is allowed to cross the threshold. You watch as he climbs the narrow stone stairs to his private chambers, which are built directly into the thickness of the gatehouse walls. His life is lived in the very center of the castle's defenses. Even when he sleeps, he is surrounded by the mechanisms of security. He hears the heavy clank of the portcullis chains and the steady tread of the sentries above his head. For the constable, the castle is not just a home, but a living machine that he must keep in perfect working order. You follow the constable's gaze as he looks out through a narrow arrow slit. From this vantage point, the world outside looks distant and small. You see the road winding away into the dark woods, the distant glimmer of a river, and the tiny flickering lights of the village huddling near the castle walls. To the people out there, this gatehouse is a symbol of power and protection. To you, standing inside it, it feels like a heavy, protective shell. The walls here are 10 feet thick, made of massive blocks of limestone that have been weathered by centuries of rain and wind. The air inside the gatehouse is cool and carries the faint, metallic scent of iron and the earthy smell of damp stone. As the light fades, the changing of the watch begins. You hear the sound of boots on gravel, a rhythmic crunching that signals the arrival of the night guards. These men are professionals. They have lived their lives within these walls, and they know every staircase, every hidden passage, and every uneven stone that might trip an unwary intruder. You watch as they gather in the guardroom, a low vaulted chamber lit by a single smoky torch. There is very little talking. They check their equipment by habit. You see a man tightening the leather straps of his gambeson, the thick padded tunic that sits beneath his mail. Another man tests the edge of his poleaxe with a calloused thumb. There is a sense of calm, practiced routine here. This is not the frantic energy of a battle, but the slow, steady endurance of a long night's vigil. One by one the guards move to their posts. You walk with one of them as he climbs the spiral staircase to the wall walk. The stairs are steep and narrow, designed to be easily defended, forcing you to step carefully in the dim light. When you reach the top, the air is fresher and the wind whistles softly through the crenellations. You are now standing on the high ribbon of stone that encircles the entire castle. From here you can see the rooftops of the inner buildings, the dark shapes of the stables, the forge, and the great hall. Everything is becoming still. The smoke from the kitchen fires has thinned to a pale gray mist that hangs over the courtyard. The guard takes his position in the shadow of a merlin, the solid upright part of the battlement. He leans slightly against the stone, his eyes scanning the horizon. You realize that for him, this view is as familiar as the palm of his hand. He knows which shadows are cast by the old oak trees and which ones might be something else. He knows the sound of the wind as it moves through the dry grass of the outer bailey. His life is measured in hours of stillness and the slow movement of the stars. It is a quiet, lonely existence, but it is one filled with a deep sense of purpose. He is the eyes of the castle. While the baker and the blacksmith and the laundry maid sleep in their warm beds, he is the one who keeps the darkness at bay. Beneath your feet, inside the belly of the gatehouse, the mechanisms of the threshold are being prepared for the night. You hear the heavy grinding sound of the winches. This is the sound of the drawbridge being raised. It is a slow process. The massive wooden platform, reinforced with iron bands, rises up like a closing hand, cutting off the path to the outside world. Then comes the sound of the portcullis. This heavy iron grate slides down through stone grooves with a series of metallic clacks and a final echoing thud as it meets the ground. Finally, the great wooden doors, thick enough to withstand a battering ram, are swung shut and secured with a massive oak bar that takes 2 men to lift. The castle is now sealed. You feel a sense of profound security. The world outside, with its uncertainties and its wildness, has been shut out. You are inside a stone cocoon. The constable makes his final round of the evening, walking through the guardroom and checking the heavy iron locks on the postern gate. He carries a large ring of keys, and the sound of them jingling against his belt is a comforting domestic noise in the silence of the fortress. He speaks a few quiet words to the sergeant of the watch, perhaps a reminder of a particular messenger expected at dawn or a comment on the gathering clouds. You spend a moment looking at the keys themselves. They are large, heavy things, made of dark iron and polished smooth by years of handling. Each key represents a door, a chest, or a gate that keeps this community safe and organized. In the hands of the constable, they are symbols of the order he maintains. His life is defined by these boundaries. He knows exactly where the public spaces end and the private spaces begin. He knows which doors must stay locked and which may remain open. To live as a guardian of the threshold is to live in a state of constant awareness. As you stand on the battlements, you notice the way the castle seems to breathe at night. The stone, which absorbed the heat of the sun all day, now releases it slowly into the cool night air. There are small sounds that you wouldn't notice during the day, the scratching of a hound in the courtyard below, the soft hoot of an owl nesting in the high rafters of the keep, and the occasional muffled cough of a sentry on the far side of the wall. The guard next to you shifts his weight, his mail shirt clinking softly. He is not a statuesque figure of legend, but a man who is likely thinking about his breakfast or the warmth of his blanket when his shift ends. His reality is the rough texture of the stone under his hand and the steady passage of time. You realize that for the people who live their lives inside these walls, the gatehouse is not just a defensive structure. It is the heart of their social world. It is where the news from the outside world first arrives. It is where travelers are greeted, where merchants pay their tolls, and where the Lord's authority is most visible. The men of the watch are the gatekeepers of information as much as they are the gatekeepers of the physical space. They see everyone who comes and goes. They hear the rumors from distant towns and the gossip from the local villages. They are the connection between the isolated world of the castle and the vast landscape beyond. The night deepens and the stars become brighter, reflecting in the still water of the moat below. The constable has returned to his room, but you know he is still listening. He is a man who sleeps with one ear open to the rhythms of his domain. If the pace of the footsteps on the wall walk were to change, or if a horse were to gallop toward the gate in the middle of the night, he would be awake and at his post before the alarm could even be sounded. This is the burden and the pride of his position. He is the shepherd of this stone flock. You take one last look out over the dark fields. The world is vast and cold, but here, behind the thick walls and under the watchful eye of the constable, there is a sense of enduring peace. The guards continue their slow, rhythmic pacing. The keys are safe. The gates are barred. The threshold is held. You feel the weight of the history around you, the thousands of nights that have passed exactly like this one, with the same sounds of wind and stone. The castle is a place of permanence in a changing world, and its guardians are the ones who ensure that this permanence remains unshaken. You step away from the edge of the wall, moving back toward the warmth of the inner buildings, leaving the guardians to their silent, necessary task. The threshold is secure and the night is quiet. The transition from the quiet, cool shadows of the outer bailey to the interior of the keep is a sensory shift that marks the true heart of the castle day. You step through the heavy wooden doors, feeling the weight of the iron hinges as they groan softly against the stone. Immediately the air changes. It is thicker here, warmer, and layered with a complex tapestry of scents that define life in the Middle Ages. You have entered the great hall, the cavernous, pulsating center of this stone world. At midday, the hall is at its most vibrant, a place where the private lives of the nobility and the public duties of the household collide in a busy, rhythmic dance. As your eyes adjust to the light, you see that the hall is not the dark, gloomy cave that modern imagination often suggests. High above, narrow windows pierce the thick masonry, sending long, slanted pillars of sunlight cutting through the air. These beams are alive with dancing dust motes, turning the air itself into something golden and tangible. If it is a clear day, the light might catch the vibrant colors of a hanging tapestry or the polished surface of a metal sconce. You look up and see the ceiling, a massive skeleton of dark oak beams crisscrossing in a complex web of joinery. The wood is stained black by decades of smoke from the central hearth, giving it a rich, ancient appearance that seems to hold the very history of the building in its grain. Beneath your feet, the floor is a curious mixture of hardness and softness. You are walking on stone flags, but they are almost entirely covered by a thick layer of rushes. These dried plants are more than just a floor covering. They are a practical necessity and a seasonal aromatic. As you move, you hear the dry, rhythmic crunch of the stems beneath your boots. The scent rises up to meet you, a bass note of dried hay and earth, brightened by the inclusion of sweet-smelling herbs. In the summer months, the servants might have scattered lavender, meadowsweet, or mint among the rushes to mask the less pleasant smells of a crowded room. It is a soft, shifting carpet that muffles the sound of footsteps, turning the busy movement of the hall into a low, gentle rustle. In the center of the room, or perhaps against the far wall if the castle has been updated with a newer chimney, a fire is roaring. Even in the middle of the day, the hearth remains the focal point of the hall. The heat it radiates is a physical presence, a warm weight that settles on your skin as you approach. The smell of burning oak and applewood is sweet and pungent, swirling together with the more savory aromas drifting in from the kitchens. You can smell roasting meat, perhaps a haunch of venison or several brace of birds turning slowly on a spit elsewhere, the scent of caramelizing fat and wood smoke clinging to the very tapestries that line the walls. These tapestries are massive, heavy sheets of woven wool and silk that serve a dual purpose. While they depict scenes of great hunts, legendary battles, or quiet forest gardens, they are also the primary form of insulation for this vast space. You walk toward one, noticing how it ripples slightly in a draft you cannot see. Behind the woven threads, the stone wall remains cold and damp, but the tapestry creates a pocket of still air, a barrier between the living warmth of the hall and the frozen heart of the fortress. The colors are deep and saturated, rich indigos, madder reds and woad blues that glow softly in the midday sun. The hall is filled with the low hum of human activity. It is not the sharp, aggressive noise of a modern city, but a layered soundscape of conversation, clinking metal, and the occasional bark of a dog. To your left, several long trestle tables have been set up. These are the boards and benches where the majority of the household eats. They are simple affairs, long planks of wood resting on sturdy sawhorse legs, designed to be cleared away easily when the room needs to serve as a court or a sleeping area. Servants are currently busy laying the tables for the midday meal, which is the main event of the day. You watch as they set out trenchers, which are thick, stale slabs of coarse bread that serve as edible plates. There are no ceramic plates here for the common folk, only the bread that will soak up the juices of the meat and the thick gravy of the potage. At the far end of the hall, on a raised wooden platform called a dais, sits the high table. This is where the lord and lady of the castle reside, looking out over their household. The furniture here is more permanent, carved from fine wood and perhaps draped with a linen cloth of startling whiteness. The hierarchy of the castle is written in the seating arrangements. The closer you sit to the high table, the more important you are in the eyes of the lord. You notice the great salt cellar, a magnificent piece of silver work placed prominently on the high table. To be seated above the salt is a mark of prestige, while those seated further down the long trestle tables are quite literally below it. You see the residents of the castle beginning to gather. There are knights in padded tunics, their heavy mail shirts set aside for the hour of rest, though they still carry the scent of oiled iron and leather. There are clerks with ink-stained fingers, whispering over rolls of parchment, and ladies in waiting with long flowing sleeves that brush against the rushes as they walk. The lord himself might be standing by the fire, warming his hands and discussing the state of the crops or the condition of the horses with his steward. The conversation is a steady, rhythmic backdrop, a murmur of voices that rises and falls like the tide. Among the humans, the castle dogs move with a sense of entitlement. Large, lean greyhounds stretch out near the hearth, their ribs rising and falling in deep, contented sleep. Smaller terriers scurry between the legs of the tables, their eyes fixed on the kitchens in anticipation of a dropped scrap. These animals are as much a part of the hall as the people are. They are the unofficial cleaning crew, clearing the floors of bones and gristle, and their presence adds a layer of animal warmth and domesticity to the grand stone room. As the meal begins, the sensory experience intensifies. The smell of the potage, a thick stew of grains, vegetables, and whatever meat was available, fills the air. It is seasoned with onions, leeks, and perhaps a touch of expensive pepper or cloves if the lord is feeling particularly generous. You hear the sound of knives scraping against the wooden boards and the glug of ale being poured from heavy ceramic jugs into leather or wooden tankards. There is a sense of communal effort in this eating. People share bowls and spoons, breaking bread with their neighbors and engaging in the basic ancient ritual of the midday feast. The light continues to move across the hall as the sun climbs to its zenith. The shadows of the window embrasures shift, slowly tracking the passage of time across the rush-covered floor. You realize that for the people who live here, this hall is their entire world. It is their dining room, their lounge, their office, and for many, their bedroom. At night, the trestles will be cleared, and many of the servants and guards will roll out their bedding right here on these very rushes, sleeping in the dying glow of the central fire. But for now, in the brightness of midday, it is a place of light, heat, and life. You find a quiet spot near a pillar, leaning back against the cool stone and watching the scene unfold. The scale of the room is designed to make you feel small, to remind you of the power of the person who built it, yet there is an undeniable coziness to it. The thick walls keep the chaos of the outside world at bay. The wind may howl against the battlements and the rain may lash the narrow windows, but inside the great hall, there is fire, food, and company. It is a self-contained universe, a fortress within a fortress. The pace of life here is governed by the sun and the seasons. There are no clocks ticking on the walls, only the slow movement of the light and the regular calls to prayer or meals. This creates a different kind of time, a slower, more deliberate way of existing. You feel the tension leave your shoulders as you sink into the rhythm of the hall. The repetitive sounds of the servants, the crackle of the fire, and the low, steady drone of conversation act as a lullaby. Even in the height of the day, there is a profound sense of peace to be found in the heart of the castle. As the midday meal winds down, the activity does not stop, but it changes character. The heavy bowls are cleared away, and the crumbs are swept into the rushes for the dogs to find. A few musicians might take up their instruments in the gallery above, the light notes of a lute or the mournful whistle of a pipe drifting down through the smoky air. The lord might remain at the high table to hear a petition or settle a dispute, his voice carrying clearly across the now quieter room. The great hall transitions from a dining room back into a place of business, but the underlying warmth remains. You take one last look around the sun-drenched space. You see the glint of light on a silver chalice, the soft texture of a lady's velvet gown, and the rugged, soot-stained stones of the hearth. This is the essence of castle life. It is not just about defense and war, but about the creation of a home in a harsh world. It is about the smell of herbs and wood smoke, the feel of wool and stone, and the comfort of being surrounded by high walls and a steady fire. As you prepare to leave the hall and explore the deeper, quieter parts of the keep, the image of this golden, bustling room stays with you, a vivid reminder of the vibrant humanity that once filled these ancient stones. The midday sun is high, the hearth is warm, and for a moment, the entire world feels as though it exists within these four thick walls. You step away from the drafty stone corridors and push open a heavy oak door that leads into a different world entirely. The air here is different. It is thicker, warmer, and perfumed with the scent of dried lavender, rose petals, and the sweet, lingering musk of beeswax candles. You have entered the lady's chamber, often called the solar. This is the inner sanctum of the castle, a place where the harshness of the medieval world is softened by fabric, firelight, and the quiet company of women. As the door clicks shut behind you, the echoes of the great hall and the clatter of the courtyard fade into a distant memory. Here the world is measured not in miles or battles, but in the steady rhythmic pull of a needle through silk. The room is bathed in a soft, golden glow. While the rest of the castle can feel gray and monolithic, this space is an explosion of color. You look to the walls and realize you are not looking at stone at all. Every inch of the masonry is covered by massive, heavy tapestries that hang from iron rods near the ceiling. These are the lungs of the room. They breathe with the subtle drafts that snake through the castle, rippling slightly as if the figures depicted upon them are moving in a slow, dreamlike dance. You walk closer to one and feel the radiant warmth it holds. These hangings are not merely for decoration. They are a crucial layer of insulation, a woolly barrier between the inhabitants and the freezing breath of the exterior walls. You reach out and brush your fingers against the weave. The wool is coarse but sturdy, dyed in deep indigos, rich matters, and vibrant yellows. This particular tapestry tells a story you might recognize. It shows a forest of impossible trees, each leaf rendered with painstaking detail. In the center, a unicorn rests its head in the lap of a lady dressed in velvet. The imagery is a universe unto itself. For a woman who might spend her entire life within these fortifications, These tapestries are her windows to a mythical landscape she will never physically visit. They are her forests, her meadows, and her legends, all captured in thread and hung for her protection. As you move further into the room, you notice the sound. It is a quiet, domestic symphony. There is the crackle of a smaller, more refined fireplace where aromatic applewood burns. There is the soft murmur of voices, a gentle hum of conversation that never rises to a shout. And beneath it all is the sound of the needle. You see a group of women seated in the most luminous part of the room, near a large window that has been cut deep into the thickness of the wall. This is the window bay, and it is the heart of the solar. You take a seat on a stone bench built into the window embrasure. It is cushioned with thick velvet pillows stuffed with down. Next to you, the lady of the castle and her attendants are bent over a large embroidery frame. You watch as a silver needle pierces a piece of taut linen. It disappears with a tiny, sharp pop and then reappears, pulling a strand of gold thread behind it. This is how the days are spent. It is a meditative, repetitive labor that anchors the soul. In a world of uncertainty, there is a profound peace in the precision of a stitch. You watch their hands, which are pale and nimble, moving with a grace that comes from years of practice. They are creating flowers that will never wilt and lions that will never roar. The lady looks up and smiles at you, but her hands do not stop. She is the manager of this entire universe. While the Lord is away or busy with the politics of the realm, she is the one who ensures the castle continues to breathe. From this room, she oversees the spinning of wool, the weaving of cloth, and the distribution of spices. But more than that, she preserves the culture of the household. In this chamber, stories are told and retold. You listen as one of the younger girls recites a poem about a night in a far-off land. The words hang in the air, mingling with the scent of the herbs scattered on the floor. You look down at your feet and notice the floor is not bare stone. It is covered in a thick layer of fresh rushes mixed with sweet-smelling plants like meadowsweet and chamomile. Every time you shift your weight, a fresh burst of fragrance is released, masking the more pungent smells of a medieval fortress. It is a sensory experience that grounds you in the moment. You feel the softness of the rushes beneath your shoes and the warmth of the fire on your face. The furniture in this room is sparse but beautiful. There is a large, heavy chest made of cedar, its lid carved with scenes of a hunt. This is where the precious linens are kept, smelling of wood and thyme. In the corner stands the bed, a massive structure that is almost a building in its own right. It is a four-poster bed, draped in heavy damask curtains that are currently pulled back to reveal mountains of furs and wool blankets. At night, those curtains will be drawn tight, creating a tiny warm room within the room where the lady can sleep in total darkness and silence, shielded from the rest of the castle. You find yourself staring out the window, looking through the thick, greenish glass of the small panes. From this height, the world outside looks like a toy kingdom. You can see the tiny figures of peasants in the fields and the ribbon of a river winding toward the horizon. It feels incredibly far away. Inside the chamber, the boundaries of life are clear and comforting. There is no need to worry about the vastness of the world when the universe you require is contained within these decorated walls. The light in the room begins to change as the sun moves across the sky. The golden patches on the tapestries shift, illuminating different parts of the woven stories. Now, a hawk on the wall seems to glow, its thread-work feathers shimmering. The ladies move their stools to follow the light, their shadows stretching long across the rush-covered floor. There is a sense of timelessness here. The work they are doing today is the same work their grandmothers did and the same work their daughters will do. The patterns change, the colors might evolve, but the essence of the chamber remains the same. It is a place of preservation. You watch as one of the women picks up a pair of iron shears. The snip of the metal cutting through thread is loud in the quiet room. She has finished a small section of a sleeve, a delicate pattern of vines and berries. She holds it up for the others to see, and there is a chorus of soft approval. This is their shared life. They are bound together by these threads, their histories literally woven into the fabric of the castle. They know each other's secrets, they have heard each other's songs, and they have shared the long, quiet hours of winter when the snow piles high against the outer gates and the solar is the only warm place for miles. You feel a sense of profound drowsiness creeping over you. The repetitive motion of the needles, the low hum of the voices, and the warmth of the fire are a lullaby for the mind. In this room, the chaos of history is silenced. There are no wars here, only the careful placement of silk. There are no famines, only the abundance of the garden captured in embroidery. It is a world of focus and detail, where the smallest thing, a single bead or a perfect knot, is given the utmost importance. As the afternoon wanes, the fire is stoked, and the orange light begins to flicker against the ceiling beams. The tapestries seem to deepen in color, the blues turning to midnight and the reds to the color of wine. You realize that for the people who lived their entire lives inside these walls, this room was the center of everything. It was their school, their office, their theater, and their sanctuary. It was a universe in tapestry, a place where the imagination could wander through woven forests while the body remained safe within the stone. You lean back against the velvet cushions, your eyes following the slow movement of a shadow across a depicted castle on the wall, and you feel the heavy, comforting weight of the silence. The world outside may be vast and untamed, but here, everything is in its right place, one stitch at a time. You stand now in the center of the inner courtyard, where the heavy shadows of the keep stretch long and thin across the cobblestones. The air here is different than it was in the high chambers or the warm kitchens. It carries a faint, cool dampness, a scent of wet stone and ancient earth that pulls at your senses. In the middle of this open space, surrounded by the towering walls of gray rock, sits the most important structure in the entire castle. It is not a throne, nor an altar, nor a treasury of gold. It is a simple circular wall of stone, capped with a heavy wooden frame and a thick, coiled rope. This is the well, the deep, dark throat of the fortress that reaches down into the very bones of the earth to find the one thing no soul within these walls can live without. You walk toward it, your boots making a soft, rhythmic thud against the uneven ground. As you approach, the sounds of the castle seem to pull back, as if the well itself demands a certain kind of quiet. You reach out and rest your hand on the rim. The stone is cold even in the midday sun, and it is covered in a fine velvet layer of moss that feels like damp silk under your palm. You lean over the edge just a little and look down. At first there is only blackness. It is a deep, absolute dark that seems to swallow the light of the sky. But as your eyes adjust, you begin to see the faint, shimmering reflection of the water far, far below. It is a tiny silver coin of light, trembling slightly at the bottom of a narrow stone throat. This well was not merely dug. It was carved, inch by agonizing inch, through solid bedrock. You imagine the men who built this centuries ago, standing in the cramped, freezing dark of the shaft, swinging iron picks against the unyielding stone while the air grew thin and the world above disappeared. Their labor was the ultimate insurance policy for every life in this castle. You reach for the wooden handle of the windlass. It is thick and sturdy, polished to a glass-like smoothness by the friction of rope and the palms of countless water carriers over the decades. You begin to turn it. The mechanism groans, a slow, rhythmic protest of wood against wood that echoes off the surrounding walls. The heavy iron bucket, which had been resting on the ledge, begins its long descent. You watch as the rope uncoils, a rough, hempen snake disappearing into the gloom. As the bucket drops, the sound changes. The echoes of the courtyard are replaced by a hollow, resonant drumming as the bucket brushes against the sides of the shaft. You can hear the dampness now. It is a soft, dripping sound, like 1,000 tiny heartbeats as water seeps through the cracks in the masonry and falls into the pool below. This is the voice of the well, a constant, whispering reminder of the hidden world beneath your feet. The rope goes slack for a moment and then you hear it. A deep, muffled splash that reverberates up the shaft like a low note on a great organ. The water has been caught. You wait a heartbeat, letting the bucket fill, and then you begin the long task of bringing it back up. This is where you feel the true weight of the water. It is heavy, pulling at your shoulders and back, demanding a slow and steady effort. In this castle, water is never taken for granted because every drop requires this physical labor. As you turn the handle, you think of the people who gather here every morning. This well is the village square of the castle interior. While the lord and lady may have their water brought to them in silver pitchers, the rest of the inhabitants must come here. You can see them in your mind. The laundry maids with their red, chapped hands and heavy wooden tubs. The stable boys, smelling of hay and horses, carrying leather buckets to fill the troughs. The cooks, the smiths and the soldiers. The well is a place of transition and a place of news. In the quiet hours of the early morning, when the mist still clings to the battlements, this is where the gossip of the fortress flows as freely as the water. You can almost hear the low murmurs of voices, the quiet laughter, and the sharp intake of breath as a secret is shared over the rhythmic creak of the windlass. It is a social hub where the hierarchies of the castle soften for a moment. Everyone needs the water. Everyone must wait their turn. The bucket finally crests the rim, dripping and cold. You reach out and pull it toward you, the weight of it solid and satisfying. The water inside is perfectly clear, so cold that a faint mist rises from its surface as it meets the warmer air of the courtyard. You dip a wooden ladle into the bucket and lift it to your lips. The taste is sharp and metallic, the flavor of the deep earth itself. It is not like the wine in the cellar or the ale in the kitchen. It is pure, neutral, and life-giving. In times of peace, this well is a convenience. But in times of war, it is the difference between survival and surrender. You look up at the high battlements and imagine the castle under siege. The gates are barred, the bridges are raised, and the world outside is filled with enemies. The fields are burning, and the streams that feed the moat have been diverted or fouled. In those moments, the people inside these walls look to this spot with a kind of desperate reverence. They measure the depth of the water every day, watching the level as if it were the ticking of a clock. If the well runs dry, the thickest walls and the sharpest swords mean nothing. The stone becomes a tomb. But today there is no siege. There is only the quiet afternoon and the steady drip of water back into the depths. You pour the remaining water into a nearby stone trough, watching the way it splashes and swirls, catching the light. The sound is bright and cheerful, a sharp contrast to the somber silence of the shaft. You spend a moment just standing there, resting your hands on the rough rope. You think about how this water connects you to the very landscape the castle sits upon. This is not water from a distant river or a mountain spring. This is the water that sits beneath the foundations, the secret reservoir that has waited for millions of years in the dark. By bringing it to the surface, the people of the castle are claiming a piece of the earth's own vitality. The well also serves as a reminder of the castle's isolation. Within these walls, you are in a self-contained universe. The garden provides the food, the workshops provide the tools, and the well provides the soul of the place. It is a closed loop, a small island of human order carved out of a wild and unpredictable world. As you prepare to move on, you take one last look down the dark throat of the stones. You can see your own shadow silhouetted against the distant, glimmering circle of water. It is a strange vertical mirror showing you a glimpse of yourself framed by the ancient masonry. The air rising from the depths is cold on your face, a breath from a world that never sees the sun. You turn the handle one last time to secure the bucket, the wood clicking into place with a final, decisive snap. The sound echoes once, twice, and then fades into the general hum of the afternoon. The well remains silent and deep, continuing its long, slow work of gathering the earth's moisture. It will be here long after the people are gone, long after the roof of the keep has fallen and the courtyard is overgrown with weeds. The water will still be there, rising and falling in the dark, a hidden pulse beneath the ruins. You step away from the mossy stones, feeling the warmth of the sun on your back once more. The physical exertion of the windlass has left your muscles feeling heavy and relaxed. You walk toward the shaded archway of the inner gate, the image of that silver circle of water still etched in your mind. The castle is a place of stone and iron, of power and defense, but it is also a place that understands the simple, profound value of a cold drink on a long day. You move forward, leaving the voices of the well behind, as the heartbeat of the fortress continues to pulse quietly beneath your feet. As you step away from the cool, damp air near the well, the atmosphere begins to shift. The narrow passage you follow grows warmer, and the scent of the castle changes from the metallic tang of wet stone to something far deeper and more complex. You are moving toward the great kitchens, the literal stomach of the fortress, where the rhythm of life is dictated not by the sun alone, but by the relentless needs of the seasons and the hungry mouths that rely on these stone walls for survival. The air here is thick. It carries the weight of 1,000 fires and the ghost of every meal ever prepared in this space. You feel the temperature rise against your skin, a dry heat that radiates from the massive masonry ahead. As you round the final corner, the scale of the operation reveals itself. This is not a domestic kitchen as you might imagine it in a modern home. It is an industrial landscape of smoke, iron, and earth. The ceilings are vaulted and high, soot-stained from decades of wood smoke that rises towards small, narrow vents tucked away near the roofline. Before you, the great hearths dominate the room. They are wide enough for a grown man to stand inside without stooping, carved directly into the thickest part of the castle walls. Even now, with only a few fires burning low, the sheer volume of wood needed to keep this place functioning is staggering. You can see the stacks of split oak and ash piled high against the far wall, their rough bark still smelling of the forest. You walk closer to one of the large preparation tables, a massive slab of scarred timber that has been scrubbed so many times with sand and water that the grain of the wood stands out in ridges. On this surface, the story of the seasons is written in the debris of the day. In the height of summer, this table might be stained with the juices of crushed berries and the green remnants of fresh herbs like parsley, sage, and hyssop. But as the year turns toward the colder months, the palette changes. You see the dust of dried flour, the silver scales of salted fish, and the earthy grit of root vegetables pulled from the dark soil. The kitchen is a place of perpetual motion, even in the quiet hours. There is a steady rhythmic thud of a heavy knife against wood as a young boy chops onions, his eyes watering in the haze of the room. Near the fire, another servant turns a heavy iron spit. The sound is mechanical and slow, a constant creak of metal on metal as the carcass of a pig or a row of poultry rotates over the glowing embers. The fat drips down, hitting the heat with a sharp hiss that punctuates the low murmur of voices. This sound, the sizzle of rendering fat, is the sound of prosperity in the castle. It means the larders are full and the winter will not be a time of starvation. Think for a moment about the logistics of feeding hundreds of people within these walls, day after day, through the shifting cycles of the year. There are no grocery stores to visit, no refrigerated trucks arriving at the gate. Everything that is eaten here must be grown, hunted, or preserved. You look up toward the rafters, and there you see the castle's true treasure. Hanging from the dark beams are bundles of drying herbs, their scent sharp and medicinal. Alongside them hang heavy links of sausages, cured hams, and sides of bacon, all slowly absorbing the wood smoke from the hearths below. This smoke is not just a byproduct of cooking, it is a preservative, a way to lock in the nourishment of the autumn so it lasts until the first green shoots of spring. You move toward the back of the kitchen where a heavy iron-studded door leads to the larder. When you push it open, the air drops 20 degrees instantly. This is the cool, dark heart of the provisions. Here, the castle's survival is measured in barrels and sacks. You walk between rows of giant wooden casks, each filled with ale or wine, the lifeblood of the fortress. Water, as you know, can be treacherous, but the fermented grain and grape provide a safe, consistent source of hydration. You can hear the faint, slow drip of condensation from the ceiling, landing on the packed earth floor with a dull thud. Against the far wall stand the salt chests. Salt is perhaps the most valuable thing in this entire room. Without it, the meat would rot, and the castle would be defenseless against the hunger of winter. You reach out and touch the coarse, gray grains in an open bin. It feels cold and sharp against your fingertips. This salt has traveled over mountain passes and across oceans to reach this stone room, all to ensure that the food gathered in the months of plenty stays edible through the months of ice. Beside the salt are the sacks of grain. Wheat for the fine white bread of the Lord's table, and heavier, darker rye and barley for the servants and soldiers. You can smell the dusty, sweet scent of the flour, a smell that speaks of sun-drenched fields far beyond the castle walls. To live your entire life inside a castle is to be intimately aware of the landscape outside, even if you rarely step foot in it. Every loaf of bread you eat is a connection to the soil, the rain, and the labor of the peasants who toil in the shadow of the towers. As you stand in the quiet of the larder, you realize that the kitchen is a place of constant transformation. In the spring, it is a place of light and green, as the first wild leeks and watercress are brought in from the streams. There is an air of relief as the salt meat is finally set aside for fresh mutton. In the summer, the kitchen becomes a sweltering furnace, filled with the hum of bees drawn to the vats of honey and the baskets of ripe fruit. This is the time of making preserves, of boiling down berries into thick jellies and storing them in earthenware jars sealed with wax. When autumn arrives, the kitchen reaches a fever pitch of activity. This is the season of the harvest and the slaughter. The air is filled with the scent of vinegar and brine as vegetables are pickled in large crocks. The sound of the cleaver is constant as the livestock that cannot be fed through the winter are prepared for the smokehouse. There is a sense of urgency in the movements of the kitchen folk, a race against the first frost that will harden the ground and signal the end of the growing year. And then comes winter. The kitchen becomes the warmest, most vital place in the castle. The heavy stone walls hold the heat of the fires, and the meals become slower, heartier affairs. Great iron pots simmer for hours, filled with dried beans, peas, and the salted meats prepared months before. The scent of the winter kitchen is one of comfort and survival. It is the smell of wood smoke, old wine, and long-boiled pottage. You imagine the people of the castle huddled near these fires, their breath visible in the chilly corners of the room, finding solace in the warmth of a shared bowl. You step back out of the larder and into the main kitchen area. The light from the hearths casts long, flickering shadows across the floor. You watch a cook lift a heavy wooden paddle and slide a dozen rounds of dough into a secondary oven built into the wall. The smell of baking bread begins to fill the air, overriding the scent of the smoke for a brief moment. It is a universal smell, one that transcends time and status. Whether you are a knight or a scullery maid, the smell of fresh bread signifies that, for today at least, you are safe. You notice the smaller details now. The way the stone floor has been worn smooth in the paths between the tables and the fires. The blackened bottoms of the copper cauldrons that hang from iron cranes. The small pile of eggshells in a corner, destined for the garden as fertilizer. Nothing is wasted here. The life of a castle is a closed loop, a careful management of resources where every bone is boiled for broth and every scrap of fat is saved for candles or soap. You turn to leave the kitchen, walking back toward the cooler corridors. The warmth stays with you for a few steps, clinging to your clothes like a heavy blanket. The sounds of the kitchen begin to fade, the chopping and the crackling becoming a distant hum. You carry with you the knowledge that these walls are more than just a defense against enemies. They are a vessel for life, a giant pantry that keeps the pulse of the community beating through the dark and the cold. The transition from the heat of the kitchen to the still air of the hallway feels like a shift in time. You move slowly, your footsteps quiet on the stone, as the scent of rosemary and roasted meat lingers in the back of your throat. The castle breathes with you, its lungs filled with the smoke of the hearth and its belly full of the harvest. You continue your journey through the corridors, feeling the weight of the seasons pressing against the exterior stones, while inside, the provisions for the future remain tucked away in the dark, silent corners of the earth. You turn away from the quiet depths of the earth and begin the long, slow climb toward the light. Your hand rests on the central pillar of a spiral stone staircase, the surface worn smooth by centuries of palms seeking balance. Each step is a slightly different height, shaped by the hands of masons who lived long ago, and your pace is steady and rhythmic. As you rise, the air begins to change. The scent of damp earth and stored grain fades, replaced by a sharpening clarity. A cool draft brushes against your face, carrying the faint, unmistakable smell of the sky. You emerge at last onto the curtain wall, stepping out from the darkness of the stairwell into the vast, open expanse of the afternoon. For a moment, the brightness is overwhelming. You squint against the light, feeling the sudden rush of wind as it whistles over the high fortifications. This is the Walk of the Centuries, the narrow stone path known as the Wall Walk, which circles the entire perimeter of the fortress. It is a world suspended between the sky and the ground, a thin ribbon of gray stone that defines the limits of your universe. To your left, the massive stone teeth of the battlements rise up to protect you. These are the merlons, the solid upright blocks of masonry that stand like silent guardians along the edge. Between them are the gaps, the crenels or embrasures, which offer you a framed view of the world outside. You walk slowly toward one of these openings, placing your hands on the rough, weathered surface of the stone. The sun has been beating down on this side of the castle all day, and the rock feels surprisingly warm beneath your fingers, holding onto the heat like a living thing. As you look out through the gap, the world opens up in a way that feels almost dizzying. From this height, the surrounding landscape is a tapestry of greens, browns, and golds. You can see the patchwork of the farmers' fields, small and orderly, stretching out toward the dark line of the distant forest. Far below, the village huddles against the outer gates, its thatched roofs looking like small, fuzzy caps from this perspective. You see a thin ribbon of smoke rising from a chimney and a tiny figure leading a horse toward a stable. It is a strange sensation to be so close to that world and yet so entirely removed from it. Inside these walls, life follows one set of rules, while out there, under the broad and shifting sky, life seems more fragile and exposed. You begin to walk along the ramparts, your boots making a soft, crunching sound on the grit and dust that has collected on the stones. The wind is more persistent here, tugging at your clothes and bringing with it the sounds of the distance. You hear the faint, melodic ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the distant lowing of cattle, and the rustle of the wind moving through the high grass of the surrounding hills. On the wall, however, there is a peculiar kind of silence. It is the silence of height and of stone. You pass a sentry who is leaning against a merlon, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He does not turn as you pass, and you realize that for him, this view is as familiar as the palm of his hand. He has watched the seasons turn from this vantage point, seeing the first snow dust the fields and the first green shoots of spring emerge from the mud. For the people who live their entire lives within these walls, this wall walk is the only place where they can truly see the horizon. It is their window into a world they may never walk through, a boundary that offers both protection and a quiet sense of confinement. You notice the details of the stone beneath your feet. There are patches of yellow and orange lichen clinging to the shaded sides of the merlons, looking like maps of undiscovered continents. In the corners where the wall meets the towers, small tufts of hardy grass and tiny white wildflowers have found a home in the cracks of the mortar. Life is persistent even here, hundreds of feet above the ground on a foundation of solid rock. As you continue your walk, you reach a corner where the wall turns sharply toward the north. Here the shadows are longer and the air feels noticeably cooler. You find a small stone bench built into the masonry, a place where guards might sit during the long, quiet hours of the night watch. You sit down for a moment, letting your legs rest and feeling the solidity of the fortress beneath you. From this angle you can look back at the interior of the castle. You see the maze of courtyards, the steep roofs of the great hall, and the winding paths of the inner wards. It looks like a miniature city, a self-contained ecosystem where every person has a role and every building has a purpose. The shadows of the merlons are lengthening now, stretching out across the stone floor of the walkway like long, dark fingers. The sun is beginning its slow descent, and the light is turning a rich, honeyed amber. This is the hour when the castle seems to glow, the limestone soaking up the golden rays and radiating a soft, warm light. You watch as a hawk circles high above, its wings catching the late afternoon sun, before it dives toward the woods in the distance. You think about the generations of people who have stood exactly where you are standing. You imagine the lords and ladies who came up here to catch a breeze on a hot summer evening, their silk robes brushing against the same stones that you now touch. You think of the builders who hauled these massive blocks into place, using pulleys and sheer physical strength to create this impossible height. Every stone has a story, a history of labor and endurance. The boundary of the walls is more than just a physical barrier. It is a psychological one as well. Inside is the known, the managed, and the safe. Outside is the wild, the unpredictable, and the vast. Living within a castle means living with a constant awareness of this edge. You are always aware of where the stone ends and the air begins. You walk along the merlons and you feel the power of that separation. It creates a sense of belonging, a feeling that you are part of something permanent and unyielding. As the sun dips lower, the sky begins to blush with shades of violet and pale rose. The birds are returning to their nests in the high crannies of the towers, their chirping echoing softly off the walls. The bustle of the courtyards below is beginning to fade as the people move indoors, preparing for the evening meal. You stay on the wall for a little longer, watching the first star blink into existence in the deepening blue of the east. The wind has died down to a gentle whisper, and the silence on the ramparts feels thick and peaceful. You stand up and walk to the very edge of a crenel, looking straight down into the shadows of the moat. The water is dark and still, reflecting the fading colors of the sky. From this height, the world seems to be holding its breath, waiting for the night to fully arrive. You turn your gaze back to the walkway, where the shadows of the merlons have now merged into a single continuous band of darkness. The path ahead is dim, but you know your way. You have felt the texture of the wall, heard the stories whispered by the wind, and seen the world from the perspective of the birds. The boundary has been walked, and the limits of the stone have been explored. You begin to walk back toward the stairwell, your heart quiet and your mind heavy with the slow rhythmic pulse of the castle at dusk. The stones remain, cold and eternal, watching over the land as they have done for centuries, while you move slowly back toward the warmth and the light of the inner rooms. You step over the heavy stone threshold and leave the biting air of the corridor behind. As the thick oak door thuds shut, the world changes. The transition is not just one of temperature but of atmosphere and sound. Outside, the winter wind moans through the crenellations and whistles across the empty courtyard, but here inside the great hall, the air is thick with the scent of seasoned wood, dried herbs, and the heavy, lingering musk of damp wool and old stone. You have moved from the desolate periphery of the castle into its very heart. Your eyes take a moment to adjust to the dimness. In the deep winter, the castle is a place of shadows and flickering orange light. The narrow windows, designed more for defense than for illumination, allow only the palest sliver of gray daylight to touch the floor. Most of the hall is bathed in a warm amber glow provided by the central hearth. This is the sun of your winter world. You feel the pull of the heat immediately. It is a physical weight that begins to thaw the numbness in your fingers and the chill that has settled deep within your bones. You walk toward the center of the room where the great hearth sits. In this era of the castle's life, the fire does not always live in a chimney cut into the wall. Instead, it is a massive raised stone platform in the middle of the hall. The smoke rises in a lazy, swirling column toward the high timber roof, where it eventually finds its way out through a louvered vent or a series of small openings in the ceiling. This creates a layer of haze that hangs permanently above your head, turning the rafters into dark, ghostly shapes. You find the smell of the smoke comforting. It is the scent of survival. As you approach the fire, you notice the rhythmic crack and pop of the logs. They are thick pieces of oak and ash, dragged in by the foresters weeks ago and stacked high against the walls to dry. The heat is intense, almost stinging when you stand directly beside the flames. You turn your back to the fire, letting the warmth soak through your heavy cloak and into your spine. This is the daily ritual of every inhabitant of the castle. In the winter, life is lived in concentric circles around this flame. The closer you are to the fire, the higher your status, and the more likely you are to remain truly warm. You look around the hall and see the community gathered here. It is a slow, quiet scene. There is no frantic movement during these months. The castle has pulled its limbs in close, like a hibernating animal. Near the fire, sitting in heavy carved chairs with high backs to shield them from drafts, are the lord and lady. They are wrapped in robes lined with the fur of squirrels or rabbits. Their feet rest on thick rugs or bundles of fresh straw mixed with lavender and thyme. They speak in low tones, their voices lost in the vastness of the room. Further out, in the middle circle of warmth, the higher servants and visiting guests sit on long wooden benches. They are busy with small meditative tasks. Someone is sharpening a knife on a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape providing a steady pulse to the room. Another person is repairing a leather harness, their fingers moving with practiced ease despite the dim light. There is a sense of suspended animation. The great outdoors, with its frozen fields and impassable roads, has ceased to exist for a time. Your entire universe is contained within these four walls. You move to a nearby bench and sit down, feeling the rough texture of the wood beneath your hands. You are wearing several layers of clothing today. First, a linen shift that is soft against the skin, then a woolen tunic and finally a heavy overtunic of boiled wool. Even with these layers, you can feel the sneaky fingers of the cold reaching out from the distant corners of the hall. Stone is a hungry material. It devours heat and breathes out a damp, ancient chill. To counter this, the walls are covered in massive tapestries. You look at them now, swaying ever so slightly in the invisible currents of air. These are not just decorations showing scenes of the hunt or of biblical stories. They are functional. They create a pocket of still air between the cold stone and the room, acting as insulation that keeps the warmth of the fire from being swallowed by the masonry. The sound of the castle in winter is different from the summer. In the warmer months, there is the constant clatter of horses, the shouting of guards and the clanging of the smithy. But now, everything is muffled. The snow outside acts as a blanket and the thick walls do the rest. The most prominent sound is the wind, which howls with a particular loneliness as it hits the sharp angles of the towers. Sometimes a sudden gust will push down through the roof vent, causing the central fire to flare and dance, throwing long, distorted shadows of the pillars against the far walls. You watch a young page bring a fresh armful of wood to the hearth. He moves carefully, mindful of the sparks. He places the logs onto the embers and for a moment, the flames die down into a deep, pulsing red. Then a thin trail of white smoke curls up, followed by a bright lick of yellow as the wood catches. The smell of fresh pine needles fills the air for a second, a sharp and resinous scent that cuts through the heaviness of the room. Life here is governed by the light. When the sun begins to dip below the horizon, which happens early in these midwinter days, the hall becomes even more intimate. Tallow candles are lit and placed in iron sconces along the walls, but they provide only small pools of flickering light. Most people stay close to the hearth. You see the dogs, large hounds used for the hunt, stretched out as close to the ash as they can get without singeing their fur. They huff in their sleep, their paws twitching as they dream of running through the summer grass. Dinner is a communal affair, but it is quieter than the feasts of autumn. The food is heavy and warming. You might have a bowl of thick pottage made from dried peas, onions and grains, flavored with a bit of salt pork that has been curing in the larder since November. There is coarse brown bread, dense and chewy, which you use to soak up the last of the broth. The ale is served warm, sometimes heated by plunging a red-hot poker from the fire directly into the mug. It tastes of malt and smoke and it sends a pleasant glow through your chest. As the evening deepens, the conversation drifts toward stories. This is how the long hours are conquered. You listen to an old man near the end of the bench tell a tale of the castle's founding, of the giants who were said to have moved the foundation stones, or of the spirits that dwell in the deep well in the courtyard. His voice is a low murmur, rising and falling with the wind outside. You find your eyelids growing heavy. The warmth of the fire, the steady rhythm of the voices, and the soft crackle of the wood create a powerful sense of security. You realize that for the people who live their entire lives within these walls, winter is not just a season of hardship. It is a season of closeness. In the summer, everyone is scattered to the fields, the forests, and the battlements. But in the winter, the castle forces everyone together. The social barriers are still there, but they are softened by the shared need for the fire. You are all huddled together against the vast, cold unknown of the world outside. The fire begins to settle into a bed of glowing coals. The head of the household rises, signaling that it is time for rest. People begin to disperse, moving toward their sleeping quarters. Some will sleep in small chambers tucked into the thickness of the walls, while others will simply roll out a straw pallet right here in the hall, staying as close to the dying heat of the hearth as possible. You stay for a moment longer, watching the orange light pulse like a heartbeat in the center of the room. The stones of the castle are cold, but the spirit of the place is held here, in this circle of warmth. You stand up, your limbs feeling heavy and relaxed, and begin to walk toward the stairs, the smell of the wood fire following you like a familiar ghost as you prepare to dream beneath the heavy protection of the winter stone. You move away from the flickering shadows of the corridor and turn toward a heavy door made of thick oak and reinforced with bands of iron. This door is different from the others you have passed tonight. It does not lead to a storeroom or a sleeping chamber, but to the very soul of the castle. As you push it open, the hinges give a soft, low groan, a sound that seems to be swallowed immediately by the vast, still air of the space beyond. You step inside and the atmosphere changes instantly. The air here is cooler, thinner, and carries the faint, lingering scent of beeswax and ancient incense. This is the chapel, the one place within these massive stone walls where the noise of the world is never permitted to enter. You find yourself standing at the back of the small vaulted room. It is not a cathedral, but for the people who live their entire lives within the castle, it is just as grand. The ceiling arches high above you, the ribs of the stone vaulting meeting in the center like the fingers of hands pressed together in prayer. In the darkness, the height of the room feels infinite, as if the roof has been replaced by the velvet sky of the night itself. You walk forward, your footsteps making a soft, rhythmic clicking against the floor. Beneath your feet are large, flat stones, some of them worn smooth by centuries of knees and shuffling feet. Some of these stones are carved with names and dates, marking the final resting places of those who lived and died within these walls long before you arrived. They are still here in a way, keeping watch in the silence. The only light comes from a single thick candle resting on a heavy iron stand near the altar. Its flame is steady, casting a warm amber glow that reaches out into the darkness but cannot quite conquer it. You find a wooden bench, polished to a high sheen by generations of use, and you sit down. The wood is cool against your palms. As you settle into the seat, you notice how the silence here feels different from the silence in the great hall or the sleeping quarters. It is not an empty silence. It is a full, heavy quiet, like a thick blanket that has been laid over the room to protect it from the passage of time. For the residents of this castle, the chapel was the center of their clock. Their lives were not measured by the ticking of a mechanical device, but by the rhythm of the services held in this very room. You imagine the chaplain rising in the middle of the night, his robes brushing against the stone as he prepares for the first prayers of the dawn. Matins lauds prime. The names of the hours sound like a song. Even those who were deep in sleep in the towers above would have been aware of this constant cycle of devotion. It was the heartbeat of the castle, a steady pulse that assured everyone within the walls that the world was still turning and that they were being watched over. You look toward the windows. During the day, they would be filled with colors, deep reds and brilliant blues telling stories of saints and kings. But now they are dark, almost silvered by the moonlight hitting them from the outside. You think about the people who spent their days here looking at those windows. For many, the castle was their entire universe. They might never travel more than a few miles from these walls. They would see the same courtyard, the same battlements, and the same faces every single day of their lives. To them, the world outside was a place of mystery and often a place of danger. It was a world of shifting seasons, of distant wars, and of vast, unknown landscapes. In this chapel, those people would sit where you are sitting now and offer up prayers for that outside world. It is a strange thought to consider. Even though they were physically separated from the rest of humanity by layers of limestone and granite, they were spiritually connected to everything. They prayed for the farmers in the distant fields, hoping the rains would come at the right time so the granaries would be full. They prayed for the king, a figure most of them would never meet, asking for wisdom in his rule. They prayed for the travelers on the lonely roads, the sailors on the unpredictable seas, and the souls of their ancestors who had once walked these same halls. The chapel was the bridge. Inside these walls, life was structured and predictable. You knew where your next meal would come from, and you knew that the gates would be locked at sunset. But outside the world was wild. By praying for the world outside, the castle residents brought a sense of order to the chaos. They felt they were doing their part to keep the universe in balance, even if they never left the shadow of the keep. You lean back against the wooden bench, letting your eyes wander over the textures of the stone walls. In the dim light, you can see the marks of the masons who built this place. Each stone was shaped by hand, chipped away with hammers and chisels until it fit perfectly into the next. There is a profound sense of permanence here. The world outside might change, empires might rise and fall, and the forests might be cleared to make way for new towns, but these stones will remain. They have seen centuries of prayers and they will likely see many more. You listen to the sound of your own breathing. In the stillness of the chapel it sounds surprisingly loud. You realize how rare it is to be truly still, to have nothing to do but exist in the present moment. The people of the castle understood this. Amidst the chaos of a busy household, the smells of the stables and the noise of the blacksmith's forge, the chapel was their sanctuary. It was the one place where they could leave their titles and their duties at the door. Inside these walls, a knight was no different from a kitchen maid. They all knelt on the same stones and looked toward the same flickering candle. You find yourself thinking about the chaplain who lived here. His life was one of quiet repetition. He would have known every crack in the walls and every grain in the wood of the altar. He would have spent his evenings here, perhaps reading from a handwritten book by the light of a single lamp, his shadow stretching long and thin across the floor. To him, the chapel was not just a room, it was a companion. He was the guardian of the castle's spirit, the one who kept the prayers going even when everyone else was too tired or too busy to remember. The air in the chapel seems to grow even stiller as the night deepens. You feel a sense of profound safety. The walls of the castle are thick enough to stop an army, but the walls of the chapel are thick enough to stop the worries of the mind. As you sit there, the weight of your own day begins to lift. You are no longer thinking about the stairs you climbed or the halls you walked. You are simply here in the quiet, surrounded by the echoes of 1,000 years. You look at the candle again. It has burned down slightly, a small pool of melted wax forming at its base. The flame dances for a moment as a tiny draft, perhaps from a hidden gap in the masonry, finds its way inside. It reminds you that even here, in this fortress of stone, the world is always trying to get in. But for now the quiet holds. The prayers for the world outside continue in the silence, a wordless petition for peace and rest. You think of the generations of families who gathered here for weddings and christenings, and for the somber farewells of funerals. This room has seen the entire spectrum of human emotion, all of it filtered through the lens of this sacred, quiet space. It has absorbed the joys and the sorrows of the people who lived their entire lives inside the castle, holding them within its stones like a secret. As you prepare to leave the chapel, you take one last look at the altar and the high, dark ceiling. You feel a sense of gratitude for this stillness. It is a reminder that even in a life lived within walls, there is a way to reach out and touch something much larger than yourself. You rise from the bench, the wood giving a faint creak as you stand. You walk back toward the door, your footsteps soft and deliberate. When you reach the handle, you pause for a moment, looking back at the single candle flame. It is a tiny light in a very large dark, but it is enough. You push the door open and step back out into the corridor. The air is slightly warmer here, and the familiar sounds of the castle at night begin to return. But as you walk away, you carry a piece of the chapel's quiet with you. The prayers for the world outside are finished for now, and it is time for the world inside to find its rest. You walk with a lighter step, the stone walls feeling less like a prison and more like a gentle embrace, protecting you as you move toward the end of your journey through the night. You stand at the threshold of the great hall, feeling the weight of the iron ring hanging from your belt. It is a heavy, rhythmic companion, a collection of cold metal that has tugged at your waist for more years than you care to count. Each key has its own voice, a distinct clink and rattle that you recognize as well as the sound of your own heartbeat. You are not just a resident of this stone fortress anymore. You are its memory. Your hand reaches down, your fingers finding the largest key by touch alone. It is cold, even in the height of summer, a piece of iron that seems to hold the chill of the deep earth within its very core. Beside you stands a young boy, perhaps 12 or 13, his eyes wide and attentive. He is the next link in the chain. He is the one who will carry this weight when your steps become too slow for the spiral stairs and your eyes too dim for the flickering torchlight. You lead him toward the heavy oak doors that lead to the lower bailey. The air here is different than in the solar or the chapel. It smells of damp earth, old horses, and the faint, persistent scent of wood smoke that clings to every surface. You do not hurry. In the castle, time does not move in minutes or hours, but in the slow wearing away of stone steps under soft leather shoes. You tell the boy to listen. You tell him that the castle speaks, not in words, but in the way the wind whistles through the arrow slits and the way the shadows stretch across the flagstones as the sun begins its long descent. You reach the first door, a modest thing made of thick planks and iron studs. This is the key to the buttery, you say, your voice a low murmur that echoes softly in the corridor. You pull a small iron key from the ring. It is worn smooth, its teeth rounded by decades of meeting the same lock. You guide the boy's hand as he takes it. His skin is warm and smooth, a stark contrast to the rough, pitted metal. You show him how to feel for the mechanism. You do not just jam the key into the hole. You must wait for the click, a small, satisfying vibration that travels up the arm and into the shoulder. It is the sound of a door yielding, of a secret being shared. For those who live their entire lives within these walls, the keys are more than tools. They are symbols of trust and continuity. You explain to the boy that your own father stood exactly where he is standing now, showing you the same trick of the wrist. And his father before him. To the world outside, the castle is a fortress of war and power, but to you, it is a series of rooms and passages that must be tended. You are the guardians of the interior. While the knights practice with their blades in the courtyard and the lords discuss taxes and borders in the high chambers, you are the ones who ensure that the bread is locked away from the rats and the wine remains cool in the depths of the earth. You move together toward the spiral staircase that leads to the north tower. The steps are narrow and steep, carved from the very bone of the hill. You tell him to keep his hand on the central pillar, the stone worn into a polished groove by centuries of palms. Each step is a memory. Here is where you tripped as a child, grazing your knee on the sharp edge. There is the spot where a leaky roof once created a tiny frozen waterfall during the great winter. You are passing on more than just access to rooms. You are passing on the map of a life. Inside the castle, generations overlap like the scales on a fish. You see the elderly woman sitting in the patch of sunlight by the laundry, her fingers still moving in the familiar patterns of folding linen even as her mind wanders to the summers of her youth. You see the toddlers chasing each other through the kitchens, their laughter bouncing off the copper pots. They do not know a world without stone walls. To them, the horizon is the line of the battlements, and the sky is a blue square framed by the courtyard. You tell the boy that he must look after them all. The keys are not just for locking people out, they are for keeping the family in safe and warm against the uncertainties of the wide, wild world beyond the moat. You reach the top of the tower and the wind catches your breath. From here the world looks small. The fields are a patchwork of greens and browns, the river a silver thread winding through the trees. But the castle feels immense. It is a world unto itself, a stone island in a sea of grass. You hold up the master key, the largest and most ornate on the ring. It is the key to the main gatehouse, the one that governs the drawbridge and the portcullis. You do not give him this one yet. This one must be earned with years of silence and service. You describe to him the ritual of the evening. How, when the shadows of the towers reach the edge of the forest, it is time to begin the rounds. You start at the highest point and work your way down, closing the shutters, bolting the doors, and checking the lanterns. It is a rhythmic, meditative process. The clink of the keys against your thigh provides the tempo. By the time you reach the main gate, the stars are beginning to show themselves in the darkening sky. You feel the immense weight of the timber bar as it slides into place. It is a physical manifestation of the end of the day. The world outside is gone, and the castle is now a closed vessel, holding its people in a dark, stony embrace. The boy listens, his eyes reflecting the pale light of the afternoon. He reaches out and touches the iron ring, his fingers tracing the shapes of the metal. He is beginning to understand that he is part of something much older than himself. He is not just an individual. He is a steward. You tell him about the people who lived here before the stone was even weathered. The ones who saw the first blocks being laid and the last capstone being set. Their ghosts are not frightening things. They are simply the previous tenants of the rooms you now inhabit. They are the ones who wore down the steps and polished the banisters. As you walk back down the stairs, the air grows cooler and the light turns to a deep, honeyed gold. You pass the entrance to the chapel, where the scent of beeswax and old incense lingers in the air. You do not need a key for this door, you tell him. Some places must always remain open, even in the dead of night. You stop for a moment to rest your legs, leaning against the cold wall. You can feel the vibration of the castle around you. The distant lowing of cattle in the stables, the muffled voices from the guardroom, the crackle of a fire in a distant hearth. It is a symphony of habitation. You tell the boy that one day, he will be the one standing here with a younger child at his side. He will feel the same ache in his joints and the same pride in his heart. He will look at the keys and see not just metal, but the stories of everyone who ever called this place home. He will tell them about the texture of the stone and the smell of the rain on the battlements. He will teach them that the castle is not a cage but a sanctuary. The weight of the keys feels lighter now, as if the act of sharing their purpose has shared their burden. You reach the bottom of the stairs and step back into the courtyard. The day is fading and the first owls are beginning to call from the woods. You hand the ring to the boy just for a moment, to let him feel the full gravity of his future. His arm dips under the weight, but he steadies himself, his jaw setting in a look of quiet determination. You take the keys back and clip them to your belt. The sound is sharp and clear in the quiet evening air. It is time to begin the final rounds of the day. You walk together, your shadow and his shadow merging on the ancient stones. The castle waits, as it always has, for the doors to be locked and the people to sleep. The stones are cold, the air is still, and the cycle of generations continues, unbroken and silent, within the safety of the gate. You move forward into the deepening dusk, the master of the keys, leading the way for the one who will follow, as the world of stone prepares for the long, quiet night. You leave the heavy, iron-studded doors of the lower halls behind and begin the climb. The spiral staircase is narrow, a tight coil of stone that forces you to place your feet carefully on the worn centers of each step. The air here is cooler, smelling of damp earth and ancient lime, but as you ascend, the temperature begins to shift. A faint, sweet scent of lavender and beeswax drifts down from above, signaling your approach to the solar. This is the private heart of the castle, the room of sun and retreat, situated high within the keep where the air is clear and the noise of the courtyard is reduced to a rhythmic, distant hum. When you reach the landing and push open the thick oaken door, the atmosphere changes instantly. You find yourself in a space that feels softer, more deliberate, and far more intimate than the drafty grandeur of the great hall. The solar is bathed in the honeyed glow of late afternoon. The sun, dipping toward the horizon, pours through the tall, narrow windows, casting long rectangles of amber light across the floor. These windows are a luxury, fitted with precious panes of greenish glass that distort the world outside into a series of shimmering, watery shapes. You walk across the room, your footsteps muffled by thick rushes and a few woven rugs brought from distant lands. The walls, though made of the same unforgiving granite as the rest of the fortress, are almost entirely hidden. Large, heavy tapestries hang from iron rods, depicting scenes of noble hunts, mythical beasts and gardens that never wither. These are not merely for decoration. They are a necessary layer of armor against the cold that lives inside the stone. You reach out and touch the fabric, feeling the coarse texture of the wool and the intricate knots of the weaver. The tapestry is thick, holding the warmth of the hearth and dampening the echoes of the room. In this space, the castle feels less like a military machine and more like a sanctuary. You move toward the window seat, a deep alcove carved directly into the thickness of the exterior wall. As you sit upon the embroidered cushions, you are struck by the sheer mass of the world around you. The stone walls here are 6 feet thick. You are cradled within the very bones of the building. From this height, you look out over the curtain walls and the dry moat, gazing across the rolling hills and the dark edge of the forest that marks the boundary of your domain. For a person who has spent their entire life within these walls, this view is a constant companion, yet it always feels slightly out of reach. You see the smoke rising from the chimneys of the village huts a mile away. You see the tiny dark specks of laborers returning from the fields. To them, the castle is a mountain of power, a place of safety or perhaps a place of taxation. To you, sitting in the solar, it is the only world that is truly real. The world beyond the gates is a stage you watch from the gallery, a place you visit in dreams or on rare, guarded excursions, but never a place where you truly belong. The life of a resident here is a life of layers. You think about the generations of your family who have sat in this very alcove. Your grandmother probably watched the same sunset, her fingers busy with the same kind of needlework that now sits in a basket by your feet. There is a profound sense of continuity in a gated life. While the seasons change and the kings in far-off cities rise and fall, the stones of the solar remain. The rhythm of your days is dictated by the bells of the chapel and the changing light on the floor. As the sun continues its slow descent, the colors in the room deepen. The amber light turns to a bruised purple, and the shadows of the furniture stretch out like long, dark fingers. You watch the dust motes dancing in the final rays of light, suspended in the air like tiny golden stars. There is no rush here. The castle teaches you the virtue of patience. Everything takes time. It takes time for a letter to arrive from the coast. It takes time for the great logs in the fireplace to turn to white ash. It takes time for a child to grow up in these hallways, learning every hidden corner and every creaking door. You turn your gaze back to the interior of the room. The hearth is the soul of the solar. A servant has recently entered and stoked the fire, adding a fresh log of seasoned oak. The wood hisses and pops, releasing a plume of blue smoke that is quickly drawn up the wide chimney. The firelight flickers against the silver bowls on the sideboard and the polished wood of the heavy trestle table. This room is a collection of memories. On the wall hangs a shield from a grandfather who fought in a forgotten crusade. In the corner stands a tall, carved chest containing linens that have been passed down through 3 generations. Living your entire life inside a castle means that objects take on a monumental significance. Every chair, every rug and every iron sconce has a story. You know the exact spot on the floor where the wood creaks. You know which window catches the first light of dawn and which one holds the warmth of the sun longest in the evening. This intimacy with the physical space creates a feeling of profound security. The walls are not just a barrier against enemies, they are a shell that protects the very essence of who you are. However, as the twilight deepens, a sense of melancholy can sometimes settle in. You wonder about the roads that lead away from the castle gate. You wonder about the feeling of sleeping under a canopy of trees without a roof of stone above you. But then, a gust of wind rattles the window pane, and you hear the distant hollow sound of the portcullis being lowered for the night. The heavy clatter of iron and the thud of the crossbeams signify that the world is closed. You are safe. You are enclosed. The wildness of the night is kept at bay, and the warmth of the solar remains yours to keep. You reach for a book on the small table beside you. The pages are made of thick vellum, smoothed and bleached until they feel like silk under your fingertips. The text is handwritten in careful, cramped script, decorated with flourishes of gold leaf and bright vermilion ink. Reading in the fading light is a slow process, a quiet meditation. You are not just reading words, you are connecting with a mind from another time, perhaps someone who sat in a similar solar in a different century. The silence of the room is not absolute. If you listen closely, you can hear the life of the castle continuing around you. There is the muffled sound of a dog barking in the stables far below. There is the rhythmic clinking of a sentry's armor as he walks the battlements just outside the upper wall. There is the faint, melodic chanting of the monks in the chapel as they begin their evening prayers. These sounds are the heartbeat of the fortress. They tell you that you are not alone, even in the privacy of your highest room. You are part of a living, breathing organism of stone and bone. Reflecting on a gated life, you realize that freedom is a relative concept. The peasant in the field has the freedom of the open sky, but he is bound by the hunger of the earth and the uncertainty of the weather. You are bound by the walls and the expectations of your station, but you have the freedom of thought, of comfort, and of history. The solar is your universe. Within these four walls, you have studied philosophy, managed the accounts of a vast estate, and watched the cycle of life unfold. The last sliver of the sun disappears behind the hills, leaving a trail of crimson and gray in the sky. The room is now lit primarily by the fire. The shadows on the tapestries move and sway, making the woven figures seem as though they are breathing. The stag in the forest seems to leap, and the lady in the garden seems to turn her head. For a moment, the boundary between the world of the tapestry and the world of the room seems to blur. You are just another figure in the long history of this castle, a character in a story that began long before you were born and will continue long after you are gone. You stand up from the window seat, feeling the slight chill of the evening air that has begun to seep through the glass. You move toward the hearth, extending your hands toward the dancing flames. The warmth is immediate and grounding. You pick up a brass snuffer and begin to extinguish the few candles that were lit earlier, leaving only the fire to light the room. The transition to night is complete. The solar is now a cavern of warmth and shadow, a private world tucked away from the vast, dark stretches of the countryside. You prepare to leave the room, your mind filled with the quiet reflections of the day. A life lived inside a castle is a life of deep roots. You are like the ivy that clings to the exterior walls, growing stronger and more intertwined with the stone every year. As you walk back toward the door, you take one last look at the room. The firelight glints off the gold leaf of your book and the silver on the table. The tapestries hang heavy and silent. You turn the iron handle and step back out onto the landing, ready to descend into the quiet rest of the night, carrying the peace of the solar with you. The stone world remains, steadfast and eternal, watching over the inhabitants who call its cold embrace home. As the sun dips below the jagged line of the distant hills, the vibrant blues of the sky begin to bleed into a deep and bruised purple. You find yourself standing in the center of a wide corridor, watching as the natural light of the day retreats from the heavy masonry. This is the hour when the castle transforms. The bright and bustling world of the morning is gone, replaced by a quiet and heavy stillness that seems to press in from the very walls themselves. In this environment, where the stone is feet thick and the windows are narrow slits designed for defense rather than view, light is a precious commodity. It is not something that simply exists. It must be created, tended, and eventually surrendered. You reach out and touch the wall beside you. The stone is cold now, having lost the residual warmth of the afternoon. It feels rough under your fingertips, every pit and groove a testament to the hands that carved it centuries ago. In the deepening gloom, the corridor seems to stretch on forever, a gray tunnel leading into the heart of the fortress. To live your entire life within these walls is to understand the intimate relationship between shadow and flame. You do not fear the dark here because you know the shape of it. You know exactly where the floor drops by an inch at the doorway, and you know the precise rhythm of the echoes your footsteps make. You look down at the small object in your hand. It is a simple tallow candle, a humble stick of rendered animal fat with a rough linen wick. It does not smell particularly pleasant. It has a heavy, fatty scent that clings to the back of the throat, but in this moment, it is the most important thing in the world. You strike a spark, a small and sharp sound that rings out in the silence of the hallway. The first few attempts fail, the tiny orange glow dying before it can catch. But then a sliver of fire takes hold. The wick blackens, curls, and then blossoms into a steady, teardrop-shaped flame. The world immediately shrinks. The vast, intimidating corridor disappears, replaced by a warm circle of amber light that extends only a few feet in every direction. The stone walls, once cold and imposing, now seem to glow with an inner life. The orange light dances across the uneven surfaces, highlighting the flecks of mica and the ancient mortar. You begin to walk and the shadows dance with you. They leap and stretch against the ceiling, following your movement like silent companions. This is the nightly ritual of the castle dweller. It is a slow and deliberate progression through the belly of the sleeping giant. As you move toward the great hall, you pass the smaller chambers where the servants and the guards begin to settle for the night. In these rooms there are no expensive beeswax candles. Instead you see the flicker of rushlights. You remember seeing the children gather the long green rushes from the marshy banks of the river earlier in the season. They would peel away the outer skin, leaving only the white, spongy pith, which was then dipped in leftover cooking grease. These lights are thin and fragile, held in place by simple iron clips. They sputter and hiss, casting a dim and wavering light that smells of the kitchen and the fields. To the people who live here, this scent is the smell of home. It is the scent of safety and the end of a long day of labor. You reach the entrance to the great hall and pause. Earlier today, this room was a cacophony of voices, the clatter of wooden bowls and the heavy thud of boots. Now it is a cavern of velvet darkness. The massive hearth at the far end still holds a few glowing embers, a deep and pulsing red that looks like the heartbeat of the castle. The smoke rises in a thin, lazy spiral toward the blackened beams of the ceiling, lost in the heights where the owls might be nesting. The long oak tables are empty, their surfaces polished by years of use until they reflect the tiny flame of your candle like dark water. You walk toward the stairs that lead to the private chambers, your candle casting a long and wobbling shadow behind you. Each step on the stone staircase feels solid and certain. You think about the generations of people who have climbed these same steps. You think about the children who grew into old men and women without ever seeing the world beyond the outer curtain wall. To them, this castle was not a cold monument of history. It was a living, breathing entity. They knew every draft that whistled through the masonry. They knew the way the light hit the floor of the solar during the winter solstice. They lived in a world of limited horizons but infinite detail. As you reach the upper landing, the air grows slightly warmer. Here, the walls are covered with heavy wool tapestries. In the light of your candle, the figures woven into the fabric seem to move. A hunter raises his spear, a hound leaps through a field of stylized flowers, and a lady sits beneath a tree of golden thread. These tapestries are not just for decoration. They are a vital layer of insulation, trapping a thin pocket of air between the cold stone and the living space. You run your hand over the fabric, feeling the coarse texture of the wool and the intricate knots of the embroidery. The colors, dimmed by the night, are still rich and deep, greens and reds and earthy browns that bring a sense of the natural world into the heart of the fortress. You enter the solar, the private room where the family gathers away from the public gaze of the court. Here the candles are different. They are made of expensive beeswax, filtered and refined until they are a pale, creamy yellow. When you light the ones set in the silver sconces on the wall, the scent is transformative. It is sweet and clean, like a summer meadow captured in wax. The light is brighter, steadier, and more golden than the smoky tallow you carry. It illuminates the fine furniture, the carved chests, and the small wooden desk where letters are written and accounts are kept. In this soft glow, the castle feels intimate. The massive scale of the architecture is forgotten, replaced by the small comforts of human life. You see a half-finished piece of needlework resting on a stool. You see a book with heavy leather covers, its pages holding the wisdom of a world far beyond these walls. Even though the inhabitants might spend their entire lives within a few acres of stone, their minds wander through these pages, traveling to ancient cities and mythical lands. The candle light is the bridge between their physical confinement and their intellectual freedom. You move toward the bedchamber, the final destination of the night. The bed is a massive structure of dark wood, draped in heavy velvet curtains that are currently pulled wide. The mattress is stuffed with soft feathers, sitting atop a network of taut ropes. It looks like a small fortress of its own, a place of ultimate sanctuary. You set your candle down on a small table by the bedside. The flame is still, a perfect golden teardrop in the motionless air. You look around the room one last time. This is the reality of the castle life. It is a life lived in the transitions between light and dark. There is a profound peace in this moment. The thick walls drown out the sound of the wind. The heavy stone floor provides a sense of absolute stability. The world outside may be chaotic and unpredictable, but here, inside the heart of the stone, everything is governed by the steady rhythm of the sun and the slow burning of the wick. You reach out and prepare to extinguish the flame. This is the moment when the castle truly goes to sleep. The people who lived here for their entire lives understood that the darkness was not a void, but a period of rest. It was the time when the stone itself seemed to exhale, cooling down and settling into the earth. You take a deep breath, catching the final scent of the beeswax and the faint, lingering smell of wood smoke from the hall below. With a gentle puff of air, you blow out the candle. For a split second, the wick glows a brilliant, angry red, and a thin ribbon of white smoke curls up into the air. Then the red fades to black. The darkness that follows is absolute. It is a thick, velvet blackness that you can almost feel against your skin. In this darkness, the boundaries of the room disappear. You are no longer standing in a chamber of stone. You are simply a part of the castle itself, held safely within its ancient, unmoving embrace. The soft glow of the stone is gone, but the memory of it remains, a warm and golden image burned into the back of your eyelids as you drift towards sleep. The day is done, the lights are out, and the castle remains, a silent guardian in the middle of the night. You stand at the threshold of the castle chapel. The air here is different from the drafty halls or the smoky kitchens you visited earlier. It is still. It is heavy with the scent of old incense and the cool, mineral tang of ancient limestone. Your footsteps, which echoed so loudly on the wooden planks of the upper galleries, are now muffled as your boots meet the solid paving stones of the nave. This is the place where the cycle of life inside these walls comes to its final, quiet conclusion. For those who were born within the shadow of the keep, this room represents the ultimate boundary. It is the place where the history of the family is etched into the very foundation of the building. As you move forward, the light from your single candle dances across the floor. You notice that you are not walking on simple stones. Beneath your feet are the names and dates of those who came before. Large slabs of gray and white marble are set directly into the floor, worn smooth by centuries of prayers and processions. Some are marked with simple crosses, while others bear elaborate brass inlays that catch the golden flicker of your light. These are the knights, the lords, and the ladies who once breathed the same air you are breathing now. They walked these same corridors, looked out of the same arrow slits, and listened to the same wind howling against the battlements. Now they are a permanent part of the architecture itself. You pause to look at a life-sized effigy carved from alabaster. It depicts a knight lying in eternal repose. His hands are joined in prayer, and his stone feet rest upon a small, curled dog, a symbol of loyalty that followed him even into the darkness. You reach out and touch the stone. It is cold, so cold that it seems to draw the warmth from your fingertips. The detail is incredible. You can see the individual links of his chainmail and the subtle creases in his surcoat. This man may have lived his entire life within these 3 acres of land. He defended these walls, he feasted in the great hall, and when his time came he did not leave. He simply moved from the upper rooms to the floor of the chapel. He became a part of the castle's memory. The silence here is profound. It is not an empty silence, but a heavy, layered one. It is the silence of centuries. You find yourself breathing more slowly, matching the rhythm of the quiet room. You move toward the altar where the shadows are deepest. To the side, a narrow set of stone steps leads downward. These stairs are narrow and steep, the edges worn into smooth curves by the passage of time. You begin to descend, feeling the air grow even cooler and more damp. This is the way to the crypt, the heart of the castle's subterranean world. As you reach the bottom of the stairs, the ceiling lowers. The walls here are not plastered or painted. They are raw stone, the very bedrock upon which the fortress was built. In the walls you see arched niches, each one holding a sarcophagus. There is no sunlight here. There never has been. The only light comes from your candle and the faint, ghostly glow of the moon filtering through a tiny barred opening high above in the chapel wall. The shadows of the pillars stretch out like long dark fingers across the damp floor. You walk slowly past the tombs. Each one tells a story of a life lived entirely within the confines of the stone. You see the tomb of a young woman who died in childbirth, her image carved with a crown of lilies. You see the tomb of an old steward who served 3 generations of the family, his place here a mark of the highest honor the Lord could bestow. To live in the castle was a privilege, but to be buried within its floors was to be granted a kind of immortality. It meant you would never be forgotten as long as the walls stood. The castle is not just a home for the living, it is a treasury for the dead. You imagine the funeral processions that have wound their way through these narrow spaces. You can almost hear the low chant of the monks and the heavy tread of the pallbearers. You can almost see the flickering torches casting orange light against the damp stone walls. In those moments, the entire community of the castle would gather here. The kitchen maids, the stable boys, the soldiers, and the noble family would all stand together in this cold, quiet place. They would be reminded that no matter how high the towers or how thick the walls, the earth eventually claims everything. Yet there is a comfort in it. There is a sense of belonging that transcends death. To be buried here was to stay home forever. You lean against a cold pillar and look around the dark room. You think about the layers of history beneath your feet. In some castles, the crypts go down for several levels. The oldest inhabitants rest at the very bottom, their names forgotten, their stones crumbled into dust. Above them are the medieval lords, and above them the Renaissance courtiers. It is a vertical map of time. You realize that for the people who lived here, the presence of the ancestors was not something to be feared. It was a source of strength. They lived their lives on top of their history. When they prayed in the chapel, they were literally standing on the shoulders of their forefathers. It gave them a sense of continuity, a feeling that they were part of something much larger than their own brief lives. The air in the crypt is very still, but you feel a slight movement, a tiny draft that smells of wet earth and ancient dust. It is the breath of the castle itself. You think about the nights when the castle was under siege. While the battle raged on the battlements and the arrows whistled through the air, this place remained as silent as it is now. The dead remained undisturbed, the ultimate sanctuary that the enemy could never truly reach. Even if the walls were breached and the towers burned, the residents of the crypt would remain in their stone beds, safe in the embrace of the earth. You begin to make your way back toward the stairs. Your candle is burning low now, the wax dripping down in slow, pale tears. As you climb back up into the chapel, the air feels slightly warmer, though it is still cool compared to the world outside. You look back one last time at the rows of stone figures and the flat slabs in the floor. You feel a strange sense of peace. The castle has shown you many things: its strength, its industry, its daily struggles, and its nightly fears. But here, in the silence beneath the floor, it shows you its heart. It shows you the end of the journey. You walk out of the chapel and back into the long, dark corridor. The heavy wooden door creaks on its iron hinges as you close it behind you. The sound echoes through the empty hall, a sharp reminder of the world of the living. But the memory of the quiet crypt stays with you. You understand now that the people who lived their entire lives inside these walls were never truly alone. They were surrounded by the ghosts of their past and the promise of their future. The stone was their cradle, their fortress, and finally their bed. The night is deep now. The castle is a vast, silent weight under the stars. Every stone, from the highest Merlin to the lowest foundation block in the crypt, is settled into the earth. You find yourself moving with a lighter step, your own journey through these halls coming to a close. You have seen the life of the castle from the rising of the sun to the deepest part of the night. You have seen the work, the play, the hunger, and the rest. And finally, you have seen the eternal rest that waits beneath the floor. As you walk toward your own place of sleep, you feel the immense scale of the time you have traveled through. The centuries seem to fold together like the pages of a heavy book. The lives of the people who called this place home are not distant myths. They are real, tangible things, as real as the cold stone under your hand. You can almost hear their whispers in the draft, 1,000 voices speaking at once, telling the story of the castle. It is a story of endurance. It is a story of staying in one place and finding the entire world within it. You reach the door to your room. The iron key is cold in your hand. You turn it in the lock and the mechanism clicks with a solid, reassuring sound. Inside, the fire has burned down to a pile of glowing red embers, casting a soft, warm light over the heavy oak furniture. You set your candle on the table and watch the small flame dance for a moment before you blow it out. The darkness that follows is not frightening. It is the same darkness that fills the chapel and the crypt, a soft, velvety blanket that invites you to let go of the day. You lie down, the weight of the castle all around you. You think of the nights on their stone pillows and the quiet strength of the walls. You feel the stillness of the fortress floor beneath you, holding everything steady. The wind outside is just a faint sigh now, a distant memory of the world beyond the gatehouse. Here inside the stone you are safe. You are part of the long, unbroken line of those who have found their peace within these walls. Your eyes grow heavy as you listen to the silence. It is a deep, resonant silence that carries the weight of 1,000 years. It is the sound of the castle at rest. You close your eyes and let the history of the stone carry you away into a dreamless, eternal sleep. And